Looking for something new to watch this weekend, but tired of everything on your shelf? Why go and spend countless time at the video rental store when it's just full of the same mainstays that are always there? You know they don't have anything new or challenging that will satiate your need for new, engaging visual stimulus. Instead, try Uncle Dizzy's unmarked, unlabeled VHS tapes. Our knowledgeable staff will personally curate a selection of tapes with absolutely no indication as to what might be contained within. Guaranteed to provide up to 90 minutes of new and exciting content that you've definitely never seen. Will you spend your Friday night watching the birthday party of a 7-year-old from 1993? It's possible. Could you get a tape showing the 50th anniversary of a married couple from Tulsa, wherein the son accidentally knocks over the table that the cake is on? Who knows? You could even be the lucky recipient of a tape containing an absolutely unhinged drug-fueled orgy, which may or may not get really uncomfortable when it turns out you know at least one of the participants. Or you could just get some random kid's high school graduation. Uncle Dizzy's unmarked, unlabeled VHS tapes. Don't spend your night not knowing what you want to watch. Spend it not knowing what you're about to watch. Hello, and thank you for listening to Mapping the Zone. I normally say joining us at Mapping, but I just said something different there. This is a podcast dedicated to a highly fixated review of large, dense books, specifically the works and context of Thomas Pynchon. My name is Kate, and I'm one of the co-hosts here.
My name is Cody.
I'm Luke.
Will is not going to be with us this week, unfortunately, but we're gonna soldier on this week and next week before he gets back. It's just 2 weeks, right, Cody?
Yeah, just 2 weeks.
Okay. So we'll have no recap here from him at the beginning, but we'll do our best to make up for the absence as we continue on. This week we're going to be talking about chapters 19, 20, and 21 of Bleeding Edge. What were our general thoughts on these chapters?
I like them. I don't. I think these have some of my favorite like funny parts. I thought there was a lot of humor scattered throughout here, and that made it fun. I didn't think there was a lot going on. Kind of like we talked about with the last episode, there wasn't a lot necessarily going on plot wise or character wise until really the kind of back half of chapter 21. But it still made for a fun read. And I found myself, I think, laughing more throughout this chapter or throughout these chapters than I have throughout the rest of the book. So it's not my favorite set of chapters, but there wasn't anything that like bothered me about it to the point that I was disappointed in it or anything like that. It was fine.
Sure. Yeah, they're really kind of like the last chapters before stuff happens.
Yeah,
I guess is the way that I'll put it, or a lot of stuff starts happening. It's really after we kind of go through these chapters and finally meet Eric in particular that we've kind of met everyone we're going to meet, and kind of every piece is sort of set in place properly for the kind of climax and falling action to occur within the book. It is kind of interesting to think of how far this happens in the book too, because really the first half to 3/4 of this book is kind of set up for the final quarter of the final book, which is something Pynchon does a lot, but I think in this particular book he does it really well, where you don't even kind of notice how much time has passed. Like, Maxine is continually still making progress in her investigation. The only reason the end of the book comes like it does is because of 9/11 occurring, which is just as disruptive to her investigation as it was to real life in the city at that time. So it's you're correct in that there is less than going on, less than usual going on in the chapters, but really chapter 20 with Eric Outfield is kind of the standout in this set of them from Pynchon's writing perspective.
Chapters aren't my favorite. They also are not my least favorite. They do feature some of the most absurd stuff in this book, which we'll get to, I'm sure. There's a lot of comedy, like Cody was saying. Yeah, these are just kind of fun chapters. I actually didn't realize that we had something big coming up pretty soon. But yeah, we're about halfway. I think we're crossing like about the halfway point of the book
Hmm.
in these chapters. So that does make sense. Yeah, I mean, there's just like I don't really want to get too specific because we're gonna get into it, but there's just kind of some really absurd stuff, some really memorable stuff, some probably Pynchon's most memorable sex scene since Gravity's Rainbow, I would say.
You started talking about
Um,
between Maxine and Eric.
yeah,
Yeah, certainly the most
um,
distinct, maybe.
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good word for it.
Um, but yeah, I don't know. These chapters are just kind of fun. They go by pretty quickly. They're pretty short chapters.
True enough. So, without any further ado or interruption, chapter 19 starts by telling us that Heidi's returned from Comic Con in San Diego. And when she arrives back home, she is met by two NYPD detectives that are looking to old address books for the man who used to be her fiance, a man named Evan Struble, which is a remarkably normal sounding Pynchon name.
Hmm.
And apparently, Evan has recently been run in on charges of aggravated computer tampering in connection with a federal insider, quote unquote. I couldn't figure out if this was related to something specific that happened in 2001. I did some cursory research and wasn't able to find any kind of like aspects of what insider trading might have been going on at the time, but it's pretty safe to say that just kind of goes on all the time. Nancy
Yeah.
Pelosi's husband is the most accurate picker of stocks in the history of the stock market from a standpoint of his returns. Um, so there's a really great exchange here of the fact that they were maybe baroquely involved rather than romantically. When one of the cops asks her about their relationship. This sort of back and forth is one of many good back and forths in this chapter. There's quite a few over the course of these three chapters in particular of
Mhm.
just like really snappy dialogue back and forth, which once again emphasizes back into sort of Pynchon's interest in noir and these sort of hard-boiled novels that are sort of known for that kind of snappy back and forth dialogue. Um, and one of the cops in particular, a man who's got just a absolute it's Carmine Nozzoli,
Yeah.
which is just it's so Italian sounding it doesn't even real is really what I get off of those particular initials and name that they correspond to. He asks her out on the spot, which is quite a bold move to go see a Douglas Sirk festival at the Angelica. I guess apparently the Angelica was a real set of like film theaters that showcased like weird old movies or independent cinema. I had not heard of it until reading this book. I don't. Has
Yeah,
anyone? Yeah.
they have Angelicas in Dallas.
Have you been to one?
So yeah, there's one about 3 or 4 miles from me that I've probably over the course of the last decade or so probably been to over 10 times. Like I saw like Jodorowsky's Dune there. I saw
Nice.
like Uncut Gems there
Nice.
Yeah,
in
there's a few of
Dallas.
them.
Yeah, I think we went into this whenever we were recording last week, when the messed up episode, but I think there's some in New York City and some in Dallas, and then some in I think they're in Texas, but I think they're only in Dallas. I think there's one
No,
other place that
there's
they are.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia right now. There's Houston, Dallas, and Plano of all places.
Okay.
Isn't
Yeah.
there like nothing in Plano,
There
Texas?
is pretty much there's an
It's just a
Angelica
big
Theater in
suburb.
Plano.
It's just a big suburb, yeah.
Yeah, so they're gonna go see a Douglas Sirk festival, and she's initially a bit, uh, I would say, scandalized by the request, but quickly um, sort of falls for the charm of this Italian policeman. Um, that's a weird sentence. Anyway, they do end up going to see the movies, and when Heidi goes out to breakfast with Maxine the next day, she tells him about their experience there. Apparently, Carmine has a particular love for an actress named Dorothy Malone, and there's a reference to the horrible aspect of I don't even know where this came from. It has to be, I think, something that originated in like gross comedy or like porn, but someone putting their penis in a popcorn box.
Yeah,
Just not
that's I can't wrap my head around that. Like I've seen the trope of it before, like
right.
numerous times, and I don't understand how. I can't imagine anyone takes that seriously and would like actually try to do something like that. I
I
would
guarantee
really
you
hope
somebody
not.
has tried at some point. I guarantee you.
Oh,
That's
100%.
probably true,
Yeah.
and they probably ended up. That's one of those hospital stories where the hospital, workers will tell that story for ages about the guy that came in with secondary burns from a popcorn bowl.
It also just doesn't seem very feasible because a lot of the popcorn bowls, even if you get a small, are about 1.5 gallons of
Yeah,
popcorn. So the physics of that whole process also confuse me.
there's a lot about that
There's
that confuses me.
this is a very high risk, high reward scenario that you're engaging
Yeah,
in.
that's true.
This is where we learn that that Heidi also seems to have an affinity for men in uniform. Another Pynchon character who seems to have this particular uh, sort of lethal attraction, I guess I'll call it. Because Heidi says that once you tried cop, you never want to stop.
Mhm.
So obviously she has the same attraction to power that Maxine has, and that Frenessy has. That's a pretty common sort of motif to find in Pynchon's work, and it goes the other way as well. Penny Kimball being attracted to a hippie. Um, it's just a particular dynamic that Pynchon seems to like to write about. And we get a reference to the Mummy, and the Mummy, great job, Brendan Fraser, on your comeback nearly 20 years later. We were all rooting for you.
Especially
Uh,
after that.
Cody hasn't. Have you still
his
not seen those
divorce.
movies,
I
Cody?
still haven't seen it, no. I don't think I ever will. I just don't I
You
don't
just
know
feel
what
like
the
you missed
purpose
the
of it
boat
is.
on the Mummy.
Yeah, I prefer, I'm an Encino Man Brendan Fraser fan, so that's where I
Okay.
go to for my my Brendan Fraser needs and Airheads. I'll throw Airheads in there too because that was a pretty
Yeah.
quality comedy. I love my mid-90s dumbass comedies.
It's been a long time since I heard somebody make a reference to Encino Man. So as they're talking about the sort of trials and tribulations of dating life as an ex-married, um, there's a great quote here that I love. Today, Maxine is halfway through takeout menus when Heidi sticks her head in with the latest episode of a continuing purse drama. Having survived an identity crisis brought on by her old Coach model, which has had observers attentive to bag signifiers mistaking her for various sorts of Asian, she is now deep in the basic princessy exercise of whether to go for a class image with long champs and live with never being able to find anything inside it, or schlep around a more compartmentalized model and accept a slight downgrade to her hipness rating. Um, I love that dichotomy because, again, that's another case of Pynchon clearly talking to the women in his life to write about female
Mhm.
experiences distinctly in books, because it can be quite an anguishing process to choose what kind of purse you want for what is going to happen to everything you put inside of it. Um, I use a tote bag. I feel like that's just easier. That's what I would tell a Heidi to switch to. But
Hmm.
what her friend Carmine bought her is not far from a tote bag as far as how they look. He bought her a Monica Lewinsky purse, um, which
Which
is
the only one I could
a real
find
thing.
was ugly. It just was not
Well,
and
yeah, Cody.
$400. $400.
well, they're historically important objects,
Yeah,
man.
I guess.
Um, yeah, this is a real thing. Uh, the the Monica Lewinsky purses were a thing you could purchase. It was shortly after the whole kind of scandal with Bill Clinton blew over, but before she faded into obscurity completely. Um, they're not good. They're not good looking purses, as Cody mentioned. The kind of selling point of them is that they were reversible, so you could sort of change how they looked. Um, if you bought one, then you're kind of buying multiple purses. That was the whole appeal. But yeah, they're not great looking. I'm not really sure what they were aiming for with the design process on those, but they didn't hit it. Yeah, so after that, I do love the quote here after where it says fairly light handbag, but Heidi does her best to assault Maxine with it in a meaningful way.
Mhm.
They chase around the apartment screaming for a while before deciding to take a supper break and order in from Ningji Happy Life, whose takeout menus keep getting shoved under everybody's back door. I I think this is the first time Pinchon's gone this in depth with cuisine that isn't pizza, as far
Yeah,
as just the
that's true.
series of like jokes that he makes. Um, there's a lot of the. D- I could explain it, but does anyone have a better concept of the sort of Chinese communist government jokes that are existing here with the pizza or the Chinese menu?
I don't.
Yeah, I don't.
So, well, first of all, what's even crazier is the fact that the delivery person speaks Spanish rather than in Chinese.
Yeah, and
Which,
Maxine or not Maxine, Heidi is absolutely horrible to him. Which
yeah, not great. But Heidi's also not great, I'll
yeah,
say.
no, it's yeah. It's definitely in character for her. But I
Yeah.
wrote in the margin next to where she was making the awful attempt at Spanish, I just wrote Jesus Heidi.
Yeah, that's completely fair. That's like all my notes that say, "Oh, smart Maxi." So, some of the things that they mention on the menu, there's a breakfast menu, which is already kind of weird for a Chinese place, but Long March Szechuan Muesli. This is one of the battle areas in the war between Mao Zedong's Red Army and the defending Chiang Kai-shek forces. Like a phase of this battle was called the Long March. Um, it was there to try and like basically take over food supply, if I remember correctly. Like it was an important area of grain that was being brought that was brought up to actually be like feeding the army and the populace. So the retreating nationalist forces, when the war was beginning, what were trying to capture the grain fields. They have something called a magic goji longevity shake. That's pretty simple. Goji berry is just claimed to be like a superfood that helps you live longer.
Mhm.
Um, the there is also the green jade energetic surprise, which doesn't really have any specific history to it or anything. There's also something called a Benji roll, which leads to a very bad joke about Asian people eating dogs. Um,
Uh-huh.
but there is a lot of fictional dogs in movies named Benji for some reason. It's just sort of a
It's
weird,
a
It
it's
was
a
a
series
movie
of movies.
series. Yeah.
yeah. It's just sort of a weird. But I also feel like outside of that movie series, there's also just been dogs named Benji in other movies.
Probably.
I don't know why. It's just a weird overlap. Um,
The pinch on wiki does mention on the green jade energetic surprise as maybe being a nod to Monty Python's spring surprise chocolates,
oh, I don't
which
think I know what that is.
okay, so there was a Monty Python sketch where the whole premise was that this guy was making chocolates and he was on trial because the things that he was putting in there were absolutely terrible, but he was giving them very misleading names.
Okay.
And having to explain them. And so the spring surprise one was basically that when you bit into the chocolate, it acted as a sort of grenade, and bits of metal would explode out of it and into the person's mouth. Um, so I kind of see, I maybe that's what he was going for. Pinchon definitely strikes me as a Monty Python fan, and that is
Probably.
a very kind of one of their better sketches. That's where the crunchy frog thing came from. So that wouldn't surprise me if that was the purpose of that joke.
Yeah, that would be good. There's also a 12 flavors drunken squid. Just a great name. No
Yeah.
specific reference there. Um, yeah. Then they also have Gang of Four vegetarian combo. This is another reference to the Cultural Revolution in the 60s and 70s. The Gang of Four was a group of four Communist Party officials. One of them was Mao Zedong's wife, and then it was just like three of her closest associates, basically. So it was Mao Zedong's wife, and then three of her advisors that formed this gang of four, who as history kind of understands it, were probably actually shaping policy in early Cultural Revolution China, less so than Mao Zedong. Or Mao Zedong was routing most of his efforts to sort of rebuild the country in the communist framework through them. And we don't really know which is which, but it would appear as though a good chunk of sort of early communist Chinese history was led by the Gang of Four, according to most scholars. And then, of course, there was also a band that made pretty solid music, and I believe that is where they got their name from.
I would imagine.
So just another case of like Pynchon taking something that could be very mundane and really does not require much thought or effort just to come up with names for her Chinese restaurant, but coming up with these things, half of which mean nothing, a quarter of which mean like, kind of bad jokes, and then the other quarter of which are just actual references to real life history. Just a particularly Pynchonian aspect of his writing. Then when they get to the end of the meal with the fortune cookie, Heidi gets a fortune cookie that says, "He is not who he seems to be." To which Maxine says, "Well, that's obviously Carmine. He's not who he seems to be." Do we have any ideas on what she might be referring to there, as far as why Carmine might not be the person that he seems to be?
I've been thinking on that for a while, and I can't come up with anything specifically. I initially my read into that was maybe that was meant for Maxine. I couldn't make that track. And then I tried to think of who, if it's not Carmine, who would it be? Because there's not really an explanation given as to why it would be Carmine.
Mhm.
So I really don't know. I think that's something that's just gonna chew on my brain for a while.
I mean, well, Carmine is it's unclear to me if Carmine is actually married, if Maxine just suspects he is. I think he is married. I want to say Nizzoli means marriage in Italian. So it could have something to do with the fact that he's married. Although, I mean, it does seem to be like if he is married, then Heidi is aware of it. So I don't really know how it would be. He's not who he seems to be. Um, there's other male characters in this book, obviously, but none of them seem to have a hidden identity at all, that we can tell, at least so far in the book. I mean, it could be something that we could kind of keep on our minds as we move into the back half, and or it's just a fortune cookie and it's just
I
meant
was,
to,
It means nothing.
I was about to
yeah.
say it could also just be a complete MacGuffin and just made to be there to here we are looking for clues where there aren't really any clues, kind of thing.
Right. Very much could be. The only thing that made any sense to me when I was mulling it over was the concept of like why you're attracted to people in uniform, or why you're attracted to power is not what you think it is. Like
Yeah.
he's not who he's supposed to be, meaning like you're going after this guy for the wrong reasons. He's not the person you think he is, and that like, yeah, he treats you nice now, but that's because he wants to sleep with you, and then afterwards, like we see with a lot of the women who become attracted to and sleep with men of power in these books, things go wrong and they're not good people. That's really what I was able to pull out of that, if there's any meaning to it at all. Maxine gets one too that says even the ox may bear violence in his heart, and says that it has to be Horst. And this is where we get an interesting detail that one time Horst choked her,
Yeah.
which is very different from how we've understood this character up until now. Does someone want to read the like back and forth dialogue about that?
Maxine cracks open her cookie. Even the ox may bear violence in his heart. What? Horst, obviously. Nah, could be anybody. Horst never got abusive with you or anything? Horst? A dove. Well, maybe except for the one time he started choking me. He what? Oh, he never told you about that. Horst actually put it this way, Heidi. He had his hands around my neck and he was squeezing. What would you call that? What happened? Oh, there was a game on. He got distracted. Brett Favre or something. Somebody did something. I don't know. Anyway, he relaxed his grip, went off to the fridge, got a beer, can of Bud Light, I believe. We kept arguing, of course. Wow, close call. Not really. I have always depended on the kindness of stranglers. A quick paradiddle with her chopstick on Heidi's head. Very huge juxtaposition in the ending there before, given what
Yeah.
happened before.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting little aside that happens there that I have to wonder, based on Maxine's reaction to it and the way that she kind of dismisses the whole story in general, it makes me wonder if it's the first or last time that ever happened.
Yeah, maybe.
It makes me think that it's just the one time that it happened, although I could see it being otherwise as well. It is interesting to me that it's treated with such lightness. It could be a laugh to get, like, Maxine is laughing, making a joke out of it so that she doesn't have to really deal with the reality of it and deal with the reality of the memory of it.
Mhm.
It is a little bit surprising to me that it's treated with such lightheartedness. I mean, it does
Yeah.
this does happen in Mason and Dixon and well, where there's domestic violence between two partners, male and female, and it's treated kind of like a joke in Mason and Dixon, and then it's treated, I guess, as a joke in this book as well. Um, which just kind of surprises me that it's even included. And I don't know, it doesn't seem super characteristic of Horst. Obviously, you're never, from my own life experiences, people can be abusive and you can have zero idea about it.
Mhm.
So that's neither here nor there. But it does seem a little bit out of character for Horst, and it does seem in character for Maxine to treat it as a joke or to kind of play it off. I will say that it does seem to kind of she does use humor and comedy to kind of get her way out of uncomfortable situations. She's been sexually assaulted in this book. Like that guy, his name I'm blanking on, like had his hand on her ass, and she just kind of treated it as a joke and got him to stop. There's been other times when she's kind of used comedy as a weapon in this book. Um, I don't know. I just don't really. I can't think of any other authors who do that kind of stuff where they treat very, very, very serious situations with levity and humor.
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's pretty accurate to how some women do respond to it.
Mhm.
There is a lot of rationalizing and sort of like, oh, just the one time it wasn't that big a deal, even though it should be. And I think it's interesting that he uses the phrase, I've always depended on the kindness of stranglers, which is obviously a reference to I've always depended on the kindness of strangers, which comes from A Streetcar Named Desire, in which a woman is married to an abusive man but doesn't view him as abusive.
Yeah.
And that that line is delivered by somebody who is staying with this woman who's married to him, her sister in particular. And she delivers it after she's raped by the husband and kind of undergone a mental breakdown as she's being carried off to a like mental health facility against her will is where that line originally comes from. So it could be that this is a reference to the fact that Maxine actually has been married to kind of an abusive guy and just hasn't noticed it, hasn't processed it, is kind of ignoring it because of what that might mean. Um, and that would also tie into the fact that, like, when you kind of look at his behavior of just like coming into the apartment and like looking at her in the shower, coming into
Mhm.
the apartment and like just eating food out of her freezer, um, even if it is something as lighthearted as smooshing ice cream, or just like taking their kids on vacation out to the Midwest doing who knows what, and Maxine feels compelled to like go to the airport. When you look at it through that lens, after kind of analyzing what seems to be a purposeful reference to Streetcar Named Desire, it gives you a different read on Horst's character that you may not pick up at first. And because this
Mhm.
book is being delivered through Maxine's perception, maybe you do end up with the exact same opinion of him that Maxine does, where he seems kind of fun and harmless, but in reality that's not the case, which would very much fit into the character of the sister in Streetcar Named Desire until the end of the play anyway.
Yeah, I've forgotten all that stuff from the Tennessee Williams play. But that's a really good pull. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I that's my like guess of what Pinchon is doing there, but of course there's not too much textual basis to support it outside of that. But it is one of my favorite endings to a conversation in the it's just the I've always depended on the kindness of stranglers than playing a paradiddle on somebody's head
With
with
chopsticks.
chopsticks. It's just a very cute way to end a conversation.
Yeah.
Um, so after that, Detective Carmine Nozzoli, it's just not a.
That name.
It's just so ridiculous. Has access to the federal crime database, so Maxine decides to cash in a favor with him, where he runs some information on the fiber salesman for Talus that she caught him with a few chapters ago when she was following around the people who left Dark Linear Solutions. Um, there's a great line here about Chaz Larday, where Chaz Larday is an average lowlife from down in the come to NYC to make his fortune, having emerged out of a silent, seething Gulf Coast petri dish of who knows how many local level priors. A directory full of petty malfeasance soon enough Title 18 beefs, including telemarketing rackets via the fax machine, conspiracy to commit remanufactured toner cartridge misrepresentation, plus a history of bringing slot machines across state lines to where they aren't necessarily legal, and cruising up and down the back roads of via peddling bootleg infrared strobes that will change red lights to green for rounders and assorted teenage offenders who don't like stopping for nothing. All the behest allegedly of the Dixie Mafia, a loose confederacy of ex-con full auto badasses, very few of whom know or even like one another. You know, this is something that Pynchon does in a lot of books, where he kind of introduces a character with sort of a paragraph description about like who they are, where they've come from. But to me, it's the descriptions like that in Bleeding Edge that have like the best rhythm to them. Like reading through them, it flows out so easily, and just really excels when he's writing in this kind of like criminal framework, this sort of crime detective fiction framework, more so than I think other books where he does the same thing. It's just
Yeah.
he
I think
gives you a paragraph and you know who this person is.
it works because that's what they do in those crime novels. That's what Hammett and Chandler and you know, even later on with like James Elroy and
Paul Auster.
Yeah, Paul Auster. Jesus, yeah. They're great at doing that, of really painting a picture of a character in a paragraph.
Yeah.
Whether
Like
it's you know,
Chaz.
yeah, like Chaz, which is I love the description because it's you know he's clearly like this, you know, like parody of bootleggers.
Yeah.
You know, but he's running telemarketing rackets with a fax machine and bringing over questionable printer toner. Which,
and like moving 18 like moving slot machines.
yeah,
Which I don't know what that would get you. Like if you just
who
stole
knows?
a slot machine and moved it somewhere else.
That's the beauty of it. In his mind, it's doing. He's really giving it to the police because they're never going to catch him now.
Never gonna catch me putting an illegal slot machine somewhere, giving them coins they can't cash in.
Can't find it if I move it 5 blocks down the road.
That would be pretty wild, though, if you encountered it, like, just from a comedic angle, if you encountered a slot machine that the tokens it gave you back, you had to, like, fly to Vegas to cash in. Like,
really go out of your way to get anything from them.
These are real tokens that have monetary value, but you need to go to the casino to can them in. The Dixieland Mafia is also a real-life reference. The concept of the loose confederacy of ex-cons and full auto badasses, very few of whom know or like each other, is true. It was just a terminology given to them by, I believe, the FBI for, like, we have the Irish Mafia, we have the Jewish Mafia, the Italian Mafia here in the north area of the country. And then, well, you go south and it's just sort of a bunch of random people doing crime. We're going to loosely organize them together underneath this term. Carmine explains that there's not really much going on from a standpoint of what this guy has in his head. Mostly running stuff for mob arrangements. He's done a couple of brief periods of time, and so Maxine then decides to pretend to be Mrs. Plibler, which again is just quite a name, Mrs. Plibler. It's so bad to come out of your mouth. Plibbler.
Feels like marbles are coming out of my mouth when I say
yeah.
Plibler.
Plibler.
From
Who's
Hash Slingers. It's like a vocal warm up. Plibler from Hash Slingers. I'm gonna start doing that before we record.
Before we record, yeah.
Plibler from I can't from
Plibler
Hash
from
Slingers.
Hash Slingers. Yeah, that sounds perfect. So yeah, she's doing her thing where she pretends to be somebody else on the phone. I also love that as soon as she calls asking for Larde, he just goes, "You guys don't have this number." Like it's not like you have the wrong number. It's like he could come up with any other thing to say to like dodge any sort of suspicion, and instead it's just you guys you don't have this number. Why are you calling? How did you get this phone number?
It's like a kid playing hide and seek. I see you. No, you don't.
Yeah,
No, you don't.
exactly. I enjoy the fact that that Maxine does a really good impression of a California person because in her response she has multiple question marks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as she's trying to find some way to get the information out of this person she's talking to, he just keeps digging into her. Darling, you are either so out of the loop or else you are one of these fucking bloggers running a gossip page. Either way, be advised we have a trace on this instrument. We now know who you are, and our people will not hesitate to come after you. You have a good day now, you hear? And then she tries calling back, which is funny, and the phone line's already been disconnected. So she now is wondering what exactly Talus is up to in all of this, and why it's getting harder and harder for her to actually get any information. And that leads to the next scene where Virva has come back from DEF CON, as again we talked about a couple of chapters, a couple episodes ago. And she's kind of sketched out by what happened there, but not before we are told that Fiona is working on a Quake movie adaptation of The Sound of Music. And Fiona and her team are doing the coding for the Nazis, which is,
God.
really something. It's like, talk about actually making a machinima. That's what they're
Yeah.
essentially doing,
Yeah.
where they're just recreating Sound of Music in the Quake engine, which, again, that's impressive that Pynchon knows about all of that. We learn that Deep Archer, the bidding for Deep Archer is starting to go kind of crazy, that everywhere the guys went in Vegas, they were just harangued by people from the NSA, the Mossad, terrorist go-betweens, and then Microsoft and Apple. I love that she also says startups on and really just sort of across the whole board. So people are getting more and more interested in actually trying to get there. Also turns out that Ice was at DEF CON. Gabriel Ice was there at a Black Hat briefing. If Will was here, I'd ask him to go into that dichotomy of Black Hat versus White Hat. Does anyone have like a clean description of that?
I don't know terribly much about it. My son is doing cybersecurity stuff at school. And
That's
he might
young.
know. Well, yeah, I know, but it's kind of cool that they're starting him out that young.
Yeah.
I think it's basically one of the two works on the sort of like protection side of things, and their whole purpose is to make sure that not just businesses and government, but like the general public is protected from the predatory people online trying to hack stuff and steal stuff and whatever. So that's that kind of their goal is to do that. And as I understand it, when they have these kind of big conventions, they will kind of do these. I hesitate to call them like battles, but it's essentially like a test of skills of like can this guy break into the system of this guy, or can he build a defense good enough that keeps this other guy out. So that's my very, very baseline understanding of it. That may be off base, but I don't know.
I think you're right. I think Black Hat is I think offense and White Hat would be defense is a very
Something like that, yeah.
oversimplified way to say it. Yeah.
If someone can explain it better, send us an
Yeah.
email and give us like a really good breakdown of it, because I'd really like to know more about it
You have 2 weeks before Luke gets back.
before Will gets back.
Or
Yeah.
sorry, before Will gets back. And then I'm sure Will is able to explain it very in depth.
Will's probably shaking his head right now at my
He probably is.
description of it.
Probably listening to this and going, "What an idiot!"
Yeah.
All three of them. This is why I can't go on vacation. So then after talking about the fact that Gabriel Ice was hanging out with a lot of shady guys, they go off and get an iced coffee, and Virva sort of says like, "Yeah, I mean, whatever. Like, they should sell it. We'll get a lot of money. I'd rather just sort of want this whole thing to be kind of over and done with, rather than having to constantly deal with the fiasco." And
they're not going to be able to keep it a secret for very much longer. Someone's eventually going to find it in the deep web and is going to take it, and then there's no money for us, so might as well sell it while they can. And that brings us to the end of chapter 19. Does anyone have any thoughts on 19 to 20?
I was kind of confused about because it said that the NSA, the Mossad, terrorist go-betweens are interested in Deep Archer, and it just kind of surprised me that the kind of more like dangerous entities were interested in what I from what I gather is like a virtual reality game.
Well, if you remember from like early in the book, they're not interested in the game. They're interested in the source code that allows them to create that environment in the computer. So that's what
More
they're
on
really
the skeleton
looking to
of it
bid on.
than the actual meat
Yeah,
and skin of it.
Yeah, I got you. I think
yeah.
Which is, I think that explains why so many people are interested in it, because the sort of openness of that skeleton it makes itself available for a multitude of uses. And if the right person can get their hands on it, they can either distribute it themselves and make a shitload of money on it, or use it for whatever specific purpose they want and hold the sort of patent on it in a sense, and be the
And
only one who has the ability to make that thing.
and what Cody has just described is why people wanted Promise, not for what Promise actually did, but for what you could use it for.
Hmm. I think that's exactly what that's what they're kind
Yeah.
of tying it to, is Promise.
Mm-hmm.
the only other thing I had, and this is small, is the beginning of the chapter. Let me flip back. Heidi's just come back from Comic-Con, and it's mentioned that her head was teeming with superheroes, monsters, sorcerers, and zombies. And it did kind of surprise me that zombies was included in that list, considering that zombies, were not a big
Yeah.
cultural phenomenon in 2000, 2001. And it would be later in the decade that they would become really culturally ubiquitous, for a few years there. Um, yeah, I mean, we've mentioned a few of them, and the Pigeon Wiki gets into this. Some, but there are a fair amount of anachronisms in this book, um, which are interesting to think about. Although I don't really know what they all add up to.
I think, and I think I mentioned this when we tried to do this episode last week. I have to wonder if Pynchon went to a Comic Con, or maybe specifically the San Francisco one, because and I wonder this because the zombie thing. While you're 100% right, Luke, in that that really didn't become a thing until later in the 2000s with your like with Walking Dead specifically comes to mind. But like in the earlier part of it, you were starting to kind of see the resurgence of it with like 28 Days Later and Shaun of the Dead and the redo of Dawn of the Dead and all that. But even that was after 2001. But I'm wondering if there has always been a sort of niche zombie obsessive culture that's bubbled through Comic-Con, and that's where he saw that. If he was there, he may have seen that and kind of thought it was interesting that the zombie craze was potentially coming back.
I mean, it would make sense because there's always been a cult following of George Romero's movies, which before the remake of Dawn of the Dead and all the other stuff in the early 2000s, 2010s, like you guys are mentioning, still had a rabid group of fans. And I would imagine that there's a fair amount of overlap between Comic-Con crowd, if not a complete
Yeah.
circle on a Venn diagram.
Yeah,
Like
that's a good
like
point.
those film posters of the original Dawn of the Dead have always sold for a stupid amount of money because of how obsessed some people are with like that movie, Night of the Living Dead and Day of the Dead, and a couple of
Yeah.
those other ones from the 70s.
That's true. I've just never been super into the zombie thing, so I've never really had my finger on that pulse. So
The score by Italian prog band Goblin is pretty good, though. If you're
I'll have to check it out.
if there's anyone looking for an interesting Italian progressive rock band who did soundtracks for horror movies every once in a while, that would be Goblin. Going back to the anachronisms for a brief second, there is a very loose case to be made by some people that the whole book takes place in Deep Archer after Maxine enters it for the first time.
That's interesting.
I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that, but if you're looking for a description or a justification for the anachronisms that at times feel deliberate, you could use that as a justification in the sense that Pynchon is trying to indicate to the reader that things aren't quite like real life, and that might be why.
I'd be interested in hearing an argument for that position. I can't buy into it right now.
Mhm.
I doubt that I would entirely, but I really would like to hear a justification for that case. That would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, I read a justification for it years ago, and unfortunately don't remember too much about it. But it was based off of the idea that, like, well, it doesn't quite seem as though everything's correct from a standpoint. So it
Yeah,
could mean,
but he has anachronisms in all of his books.
yeah, he does.
So and because I don't think they're meant to take place. I always get the feeling that it's a sort of like a Dark Tower situation where it's like an alternate
Yeah,
history, alternate timeline kind of thing.
I would imagine that
So-
that's probably more likely what it is. He's telling an alternate history of the United States that still retains the important parts.
Yeah.
So that brings us to chapter 20, where we learn that Detective Nizzoli has managed to give Maxine the driver's license ID photo of Eric Jeffrey Outfield. And if you remember who Eric Outfield is, he was the guy that Reg had him to kind of scour around the deep web in order to figure out what might be going on from the coding side with Hashslingers and with Gabriel Ice's company. And we learn that he apparently spends his time in a couple of places, one of which is a strip club named the Joie de Vivre.
Greatest thing I've ever heard in my life, probably. So stupidly good.
It's a pretty ridiculous term.
He had to have been proud of himself for that one. That's fucking good.
Yeah, he had to have been proud of himself for that. I believe, if I remember correctly, like the original French phrase, like joie de vivre, is about like lust for life, is basically what that means.
Yeah, an exuberant
Yeah.
enjoyment of
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
So joie de vivre would be lust for beaver. um,
Actually, the beaver is not like in French. I had to look this up, but it's not a word. It's not a word in any language, according to Google.
yeah, something tells
if you,
me Stu Gotts doesn't care.
that's
No.
probably true. There is a CD by the Screaming Divas from 1997 that's called Joie de Vivre.
Hmm.
I think
Oh,
the
wow.
term was trademarked for like 10 years in the U.S. for some unknown reason.
As previously mentioned, this establishment is run by an Italian man named Stu Gotts, which is Italian American slang for male genitalia. It's also the name of Tony Soprano's boat, as the Bleeding Edge wiki indicates. I don't know why you'd name your boat that. It's just, I don't get it. But
It's a very Tony Soprano thing to do.
yeah, but then he also had like jackets with it embroidered on the jacket that you wore on the boat. So he's trying to be like classy about his balls joke boat. Yeah, it's just something else. Again, it's just, there's a lot of Italian American stereotypes in this book in particular,
Yep.
which makes me think that Pynchon just finds the probably New York Italian American accent funny. That's what I imagine he's commenting on. But that's the person who runs the strip club, and Maxine is trying to basically get access to who might be Eric Outfield. She just wants Stu Gotts to point him out. Instead, he thinks that she's there to audition for their specific MILF night, which is on Tuesday. Which is, wow, is that an idea for a strip club? Just Tuesday.
Stu Gotts is a real piece of work.
Stu Gotts is a cool guy. He's really cool. Maxine has a great retort to that, where she says Tuesday's my Tupperware party.
Yep.
Yeah, it's technically a Crime of Law 49 reference.
Right, yeah. That's one of my favorite jokes too from any of Pynchon's books at the beginning of Crying About 49 of she's getting home from a Tupperware party where someone was deliberately spiking the punch with too much alcohol to try and ply them to buy Tupperware container. It's so good. So then he tries to get her to audition now, but she initially says no, but then realizes that an opportunity for her to kind of scope out where Eric might be in the bar. So she gets dressed and goes out on stage and begins to do somewhat of a performance where it seems like she's really the only person performing in the traditional sense. This is a very, very just seedy strip club environment. Just the whole description from the guy who owns it, the name, what Pynchon says the average person who's on stage is actually doing. It's just not a good place. Definitely a place where you might get sick after you visit.
Just from walking in, you might catch something.
Yeah, just it's one of those places that when you walk in, it's just kind of damp.
You're not going to go to a place called Joie de Vivre and have anything good happen.
That's where you go. And you're kind of afraid for your life for most of the night.
If you've hit rock bottom for any number of reasons, that's why you would end up at this establishment.
I think Joie de Vivre actually is the rock bottom. And I don't think there's really anywhere else to go after that.
This is it. This is the
which I do think, again, she's just very funny and like very clever as far as a character because she leans into her age and she like disinfects the pole.
That killed me.
In like a very domestic way. Before she starts
it's also sexual, yeah.
Yeah, domestically sexual.
Yeah.
It's so good.
She makes a point of taking from her purse a dispenser of handy wipes and with housewifely thoroughness disinfected the pole, slowly fondling it up and down while casting demure glances along the bar.
It's the demure glances that killed me. Just the idea of her like looking seductively at people throughout the bar while she wipes this thing down with a fucking Lysol wipe. Yeah, you like that, huh?
I'll clean your house. Oh my god. And then I love the last sentence in that paragraph too. Their skins in the spill from this fluorescent indigo lighting register the same pallid hue as if permanently stained from too much cathode radiation.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a beautiful way to describe the people who are in the bar of like, these are the kind of guys who sit around and watch TV all day. And you can almost tell because of the fact that they've been like indelibly stained in their skin's pigmentation by the television.
Yeah. If they're not in front of their awesome TV, they're here. It's the only two places they are.
Yeah. Yep. Shortly after she starts dancing, somebody changes the music to tracks from U2, disco tracks, Guns N' Roses, Journey.
The strip club mixtape.
Way too much Moby for Maxine's taste, which is a great joke. All before eventually someone putting on what song was Jamiroquai's Canned Heat? Yeah.
Which I never heard that until this. I read this. I'm familiar with Virtual Insanity. Fucking everybody is.
Sure.
That song is pretty goddamn good. Like it's the bass line, especially. It rips.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great song. Was it one of those ones where as soon as you put it on, you're like, oh, I have heard this?
I think I probably have at some point.
Yeah.
But my immediate thought was like, oh yeah, I could absolutely see this being played in a strip club for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Especially, with a bass line that Maxine has never found a way to resist. Pretty accurate description of the bass line in Canned Heat. But before that song starts playing, we do get a description of Eric Jeffrey Outfield.
Jesus.
Which, oh boy, does somebody want to read that paragraph starting with "in the course of a dance routine"?
In the course of a dance routine, somewhere between vanilla and cherry ripple, including leg hangs, helical descents, upside down humping of the pole, and so forth, Maxine notices this one party out on a remote curve of the bar, drinking, you'd say relentlessly, what will prove to be Jägermeister in 151 through a day-glow straw out of a 21-ounce convenience store cup he has brought in with him, and showing no signs of alcohol poisoning, which could mean either unnatural immunity or unreachable despair. She undulates over for a closer look, and sure enough, it's him, Eric Jeffrey Outfield, uber geek looking, except for the bare upper lip, and a newly acquired soul patch, just like his ID photo. He's wearing cargo pants in a camo print whose color scheme is intended for some combat zone very remote, if not off-planet, and a t-shirt announcing in Helvetica, P, real geeks use command prompts, and P, accessorized with a bat belt, clanking like a charm bracelet with remotes for TV, stereo, and air conditioner, plus laser pointer, pager, bottle opener, wire stripper, voltmeter, magnifier, all so tiny that one legitimately wonders how functional they can be. That's the most unhinged description of a human being I've probably ever read in my life.
Well, also the whole like mixing 151 and Jägermeister,
Oh God.
which is pretty
Yeah.
disgusting. I have done that. I did that in college one time. I mixed Jägermeister with gin whenever I was on spring break, because I was out of mixers, and it was pretty. It doesn't taste good, I will
You run out
say.
of mixers every spring break? Is that why this was an annual activity?
No, this was just in college. Just one time
Okay.
in college, I did this.
Maybe it tastes better if you drink it through a Dayglow straw.
Maybe, yeah.
Out of a
but it-
convenience store cup that you
Convenience
brought
store
with
cup.
you.
It's a pretty disgusting mixture, and Jägermeister and pretty much any other alcohol. I mean, it's pretty next
I've
level.
never liked
Pretty that he's doing
Jägermeister.
that.
It's
I went through a phase in college where I drank a lot of Jägermeister.
I get the feeling though with his cup that he's brought in, that cup's probably lived in and has a coating on the inside of years of
reused.
alcohol.
Yeah,
Probably, yeah. I can't imagine the microbiome that convenience store cup has. Yeah, so you nailed it. It's the most unhinged description of a person ever. Like, between the actual clothes that he's wearing, but then his weird utility belt that just has all of his remotes hanging off of it that he brings with him into public for some reason.
And his cargo shorts.
Yeah.
Fucking camo print cargo shorts.
He's like a mixture of like an engineer and
He's
just
what
a
he reminds me of.
nerd.
If you've seen Spaced, he reminds me of Nick Frost's character in Spaced. I can't think of his name off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But that kind of like, I tried to be in the military and couldn't, so I'm doing other things now, and I always have like military style clothing on, even though I have no need for it. And
it's required.
Yeah.
He has to be.
you
tactical.
never know when something comes up that you might need, a voltmeter or a TV remote.
Yeah, it's really the device remotes from his own home that get to me. The other stuff, I guess, if you were building computers or something, could come into handy, but why you would need your TV remote, who knows? Mike Watts is the name of the character from Space.
Mike Watts, yes.
Yeah.
I love that show.
So then Maxine dances over to Eric and tries to keep up her cover, so to speak, to get him to go to the private dance room, and Eric just goes, "Yeah, I don't have any money. Just I got nothing for you. I'm just here." And then eventually she gets him to go to the champagne room just to talk to her, and they're just gonna like make it look like there's a transaction going on. But as soon as they step back there, it turns out that he's been banned from this particular facility for being weird about his feet in particular.
I do like the description that's given of him leading her down there. So I was at the time when we did this episode last week, I'd been watching I found a new science channel on YouTube. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head now. But they talk a lot about astrophysics and stuff. And reading this description, and it's just it's two sentences. He leads her toward the back and down a flight of stairs. The lighting drifts more and more into the red end of the spectrum. I don't know if it was intentional for him to put this description in there, but that's essentially what happens when you go down a black hole. Is the light redshifts? That's the last thing you see. Is everything redshifts before you hit the center mass of the black hole, which is kind of now that's the image I have when I go back to that line.
That's cool. I didn't know that. Yeah, so the two of them have a quick back and forth, especially about Eric getting kicked out because he likes feet. And then
that can't be it. That can't be
no,
the reason.
Of course it's not. I'm sure he was being real creepy and was probably touching the women in particular.
To get kicked out of an establishment like that would take.
Yeah, what do you have to do to get kicked out of Joie de Vivre? You'd have to be a real like bottom of the barrel, like just pervert in order for that to happen. So then they walk back out, and then I love that Stu Gotts reemerges just to say, "What's with Footboy?" This is so clearly what he is known for. The point that even Eric is like, "Yeah, that guy's messed up, and this is why." And at this point, he offers her a job, and we figure out how Maxine has all the she uses undercover sort of infiltration devices. Says she takes his card, which may come in handy someday, though in ways neither can see right at this moment. Just another one of these examples again of like she doesn't want to work here. Obviously doesn't want to work here. Why would she? But at the same time, it's like this could come in handy.
Yeah.
Just goes to show how she is always like thinking and perceiving the world around her in terms of what she can potentially use it for her investigations in the future, or where these different covers or access to these locations can actually be of benefit to her. Just another case of again Pynchon proving that he can write a character possessed and intelligent. It's not always just kind of idiots that he writes. Does someone want to read the description of Eric's apartment that starts right after the page break?
Eric lives in a fifth-floor walk-up studio in Loisada, a doorless bathroom wedged in one corner, and in another, a microwave, coffee maker, and miniature sink. Liquor store cartons full of personal effects are stacked around haphazardly, and most of the limited floor space is littered with unwashed laundry, Chinese takeout containers and pizza boxes, empty Smirnoff ice bottles, old copies of Heavy Metal, Maxim, and Anal Teen Nymphos Quarterly, women's shoe catalogs, SDK discs, game controllers, and cartridges for Wolfenstein, Doom, and others. Paint peels from selected ceiling areas, and window treatments are basically street grime. Eric finds a cigarette butt a little longer than the others in a running shoe it's been using for an ashtray and lights up, lurches over to the electric coffee mess, pours out some cold day-old sludge into a mug with a regular outline on it and the word CSS is awesome running outside the frame. Oh, want some?
Oh, just I couldn't.
Exactly the apartment you would imagine you would have.
100% the apartment that guy would have. I could not do it though. I'd need to leave, and thus my time as a detective would be over. So they decide to light up a joint, which I would not consume drugs around this person, much less go to his house. Especially because you don't know where that weed came from or what might be in it. This man's lighting cigarettes out of a shoe. So he starts giving her a foot massage, which again, Maxine, I understand, but you're a braver woman than I. I could not do what you're doing. And then I use the phrase distinct for what occurs after this, because it is distinct. But Maxine basically just uses her feet to pleasure the guy.
Basically not the right. She does.
She does.
There's nothing else to it.
She does. No, that is. You are correct. You are correct. That is what she does.
Is there? I have to wonder about like this. This made me think back to the Metzger and Oedipa rendezvous, if you will, in Lot 49. I don't know what. I cannot for the life of me figure out like what Maxine's purpose is in doing this. Like, I understand she needs to press him for information and to get him to help her out with everything. But why this? There's like this guy can't be that. Well, no, maybe this is the way to get him. I don't know.
I'm sure this is just the way that he would be willing to talk to you. Like, unfortunately, especially if you're a woman. Like, I would imagine that if Maxine was not a woman, this would not be what he could just probably take money from a guy. But this would be his price in order to like give the information to Maxine that he wants. I think that there's some understanding that based upon where she came from, which is a place that he frequents regularly,
And gets
and
kicked out of regularly.
gets kicked out of regularly, and is known for being the foot boy.
Yeah.
That I think she just sort of was resigned to the fact that she was probably gonna have to do something like that in order to get out of this
Yeah.
situation, what she needed to get out of it. So I think it's just sort of a resigned, well, if this is what I have to do, seem like game about it, is I think what she's really doing there.
That makes sense.
Yeah. We learn though that Eric is even weirder. He just likes to wear condoms.
Designer condoms.
Designer condoms, specifically the Trojan Abstract Expressionist collection of condoms, which these don't exist. In case you were wondering,
Well, but if they did,
Exactly, yeah.
exactly. I am very curious what they would what they would look like if they actually decided to
I
make
think the
them.
better question is, how would you market that? Like, what's your...
Just it's
what-
sold in museum gift shops only.
Yeah. the MoMA. It's like,
Yeah.
there's a whole display case of Jackson Pollock approved.
Which, I mean, that could be what Pynchon is, as much as we're joking about it, that could be Pynchon's potentially trying to say, is that, like, is trying to be, like, trying to
That's a
convince
good point.
himself that what he's doing is classy, or that he somehow is more than kind of the kind of gross person that the reader and Maxine and everyone else sees. By saying,
Ignore
like,
the apartment and
Yeah.
my attire. I am a man who knows art.
yeah, I'm a man who knows abstract expressionism. I'm familiar with the artistic movement created by Pollock and Rothko. Yeah, exactly. That's what if this has anything more to it than just a joke, I would imagine this is why it's there. Yeah, and even Maxine acknowledges in that scene, like, yeah, this is like, I probably shouldn't be doing this. Like, this is kind of gross. Or like, I think the exchange is like, I know this is definitely weird. Like she's fully aware, but he's just sort of falling into the fact that he's getting what he wants out of it. So he and they basically they finish, I guess is the way that I'll put it. And it turns out that what she's trying to get out of him is information about the deep web. He describes it as the deep web is supposed to be mostly obsolete sites and links, an endless junkyard like in The Mummy, 1999. Adventurers will come here someday to dig up relics of dynasties, but it only looks that way, according to Eric. Behind it is a whole invisible maze of constraints engineered in, lets you go in some places, keeps you out of a hidden code of behavior you have to learn and obey, a dump with a structure. And so she basically just says, what I would like to know. Does she say what website she's
I don't think
for?
she specifically says,
does.
because she just mentions that it's that it might be encrypted and that she would need some alpha geek crypto whiz to look into it. But I don't think she specifically says what it is she's looking for, just kind of implying that it's something that only he can get.
Yeah, so she wants to hire him to look into what she says is the site I'm thinking about. It may not even be there. One of the sites, maybe some French time travel, mind control stuff. And then he attempts to bribe her by saying, "Why don't I buy you some knockoff Christian Louboutin shoes, and then we can do this again." To which she's not really all that interested in it. She'd rather just pay
Can't
him.
imagine why. He's got everything going for him.
Yeah. And at this point, there's another reference in here to a colorful California butterfly, which again, that's another reference to, in this, it's directly to Mothra, but this is one of many butterfly references we've had already, as I've mentioned a couple of different times with Monarch and Project Monarch. And then they sort of just hang around with each other for a little bit, and then she asks about Lester Trapes to see if he might know anything about the fact that he was killed, have happened. So chapter 21 begins with Maxine walking around shopping in the Soho Chinatown Tribeca interface, as she puts it. Maxine and Heidi then find themselves down in the East Village, and they're going to be going and seeing Driscoll Paget, one of the other characters from previous in the book, bringing up a lot of stuff that happened a while ago
Yeah.
in these 3 chapters. Who's going to be playing in a nerd rock band called the Pringle Chip Equation. This is an incredibly nerdy reference to the fact that Pringles are shaped in a particular type of, I believe it's a parabola that they're shaped in.
Hyperbolic parabola, yeah.
Yeah, that required quite a bit of math to get that created and functional in a potato chip machine.
Which Luke brought up something interesting that I didn't know when we did this last week. If you want to address that, Luke.
Is it the Gene Wolfe thing?
Yeah.
It's the Gene Wolfe thing. Gene Wolfe played a part in creating the Pringle brand, the Pringle chip. He didn't come up with the idea, I don't think, but he helped come up with some of the machines that made them, that make them. It's a big meme in the Gene Wolfe community. His connection to Pringles, also the people like to speculate, although I don't think there's any official proof of it, that the Pringles guy looks like Gene Wolfe because they both have the big bushy mustache.
The Pringles guy looks exactly like Gene Wolfe.
Really does.
He does. He does. It is true. It is true.
So yeah, they're going to go see this band, and then suddenly, as they're walking down the street, they're beginning to get strange whiffs of smell, as it says. And it turns out that Conkling Speedwell, packing his Naser tonight, which in fact looks to have been recently deployed, its LED-studded delivery cone blinking truculently. He is accompanied by a small detachment of corporate security in designer fatigues, each with a shoulder patch shaped like a flask of Chanel No. 5, with Fragrance Force written a stopper part, and on the label, the Mirrored Sea logo flanked a couple of clocks. It's just...
This is where I have to think that,
what?
this is a very Simpsons-esque joke.
Yeah,
that I have to think that he's inspired by that, especially Golden Age of Simpsons. This is the kind of shit they would do. The
other thing that it reminded me of, you are correct, and it's very, very much a Simpsons thing. It also reminded me of the emergency response team in White Noise. I don't know if you've read that, but midway through the book, they come across a group called SimuVac, which stands for Simulated Evacuation, except they're running the actual evacuation for the airborne toxic event that's occurring in the book, and are similarly strangely portrayed. Not quite to that level of comedic effect, but it was another thing that I thought of. But yeah, definitely very Simpson-esque, especially the patch and the name being Fragrance Force.
Yeah.
It turns out to have been a sting operation because a bunch of people are trying to pass off some fake
Latvian counterfeit products.
Yeah. Did he say specifically what was it? Counterfeit?
No.
Yeah.
Just that it was powerful enough to essentially knock him out.
Yeah. Well, it also it says the savant kind, I guess. But meanwhile, look, Jay, there's a whole van full of Chanel No. 5 property. So it might have had something to do with bootlegging Chanel No. 5.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, the quintessential perfume. I think most people, when they think of the concept of perfume, the platonic ideal, they think of Chanel No. 5. It's funny that he left off being part of the Fragrance Force from his resume.
His earlier run-in,
talking to Maxine.
Kind of a big deal, I would think.
Yeah. At this point, Heidi starts becoming smitten with Conkling and tries to get him to come with them to go see the Pringle Chip Equation at the bar. But he says basically that they have to finish up the paperwork back at precinct. And so he does not. He declines to come. I don't know what he would think of presumably a punk bar. I can't imagine those smell very good to somebody with his particular nasal abilities.
Especially since there's not AC and it's
Yeah.
the summertime.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As someone who's played a lot of punk clubs in a hot part of the world, it sucks.
It's I mean, even in a cold part of the world, it's not great.
I would imagine, yeah. Even the winter shows that we played weren't the best as far as smells concerned.
I can't say the bars my band played in were great smelling. um, there's then proceeds to be the next song that we have in the book, and again, I like this song.
It genuinely is really good.
Yeah, definitely. Does anyone have any particular thoughts on the song?
I mean, as far as like what it's getting at, I don't really think it's too obtuse. Really, it has a
No,
sort
it's
of
not esoteric.
yeah, it's pretty much right there. I just think it's very well written. Like from a just in regard to his other songs in the other books, at least that we've covered so far, it might be the best one he's done.
It's very good. It is genuinely. I'd like to hear the song performed, especially by what appears to be kind of a weird, like
The description of the instruments
synth
available to this
rock.
band makes me wonder
Yeah.
what it might sound like. It's a
Like,
very
the band are all wearing
know.
nerd eyeglass frame wedding. Lead guitarist plays an Epiphone Les Paul custom and a keyboardist a DW8000. There's also a reed person with assorted horns and a percussionist with a wide range of tropical instruments. In a special guest appearance tonight, Driscoll Patch is heard on the occasional vocal. Maxine imagined that Driscoll's universe of three-letter echoes might include LB. Now look at this latest edition. Yeah, it's an interesting sounding band, almost like maybe it's rock.
The only thing I can think of as far as like a band that would have that sort of eclectic layout of instrumentation would be something like Frank Zappa and just the
Sure.
weird collection of instruments that he would always have available to him.
Maybe Deceit.
Yeah. But they're just, I mean, the fact that they're described as what is it, geek rock or nerd rock or something like that makes me wonder
more
specifically if there's something, if there's a specific band that he was keying in on at the time. I don't know who that would be though, because like the bands that I can think of that are considered like, math rock or quote unquote nerd rock wouldn't really fit that kind of instrumentation.
So after the set, it turns out that Conkling did show up at some point because Driscoll waves them over and Conkling is also there with them. And this is when we get Conkling and Heidi talking about what Hitler's preferred perfume or cologne may have been. From what I can tell, this is just something Pynchon just like wrote. I couldn't find any.
Well, the 4711 thing, that there is a history to that.
I do know that that's a real cologne.
It is the original cologne.
And it was used on U-boats too.
And it was, yeah, they used to transport it on U-boats, like in massive quantities. They would transport it around. And apparently the shape of the bottle has, I think, remained unchanged since they initially started the company.
Fascinating.
So yeah, there's some real history in there. Whether or not Hitler actually used it, who the hell knows? But yeah, 4711 is the original first cologne.
Interesting. Yeah, that part I did not do research on to the degree that apparently I could have. I just assumed, knowing that JFK wore the cologne and that his father admired Hitler, was just Pynchon really just kind of guessing. It is quite funny, however, the idea of a photo and Admiral Donitz shaking hands while passing a comedically large bottle of cologne back and forth. That's really something.
Yeah.
It's funny that he just carries that around apparently too.
Yeah.
It's like in his
just
pocket,
has
he just
it.
has a picture of Hitler with some cologne.
Anytime, it's like his it's like his special interest. Anytime someone brings up Hitler's cologne, he's like, "Look at this photo I have." But Maxine can kind of see that something is starting to bloom, I guess we'll say, between Conkling and Heidi, and that Heidi is already forgetting about Carmine in favor of a man that Maxine is kind of interested in. But not before Driscoll stabs Conkling directly in the heart, metaphorically, by explaining to him that the photo he has is clearly photoshopped.
real dagger for that poor man.
That poor man.
That's like the only thing he has.
Yeah, it's the one thing that he really has outside of his collection of cologne back at his apartment. Yeah, I do love the quote here too that says, "Maxine has tried since to keep their conversations professional. Conkling does ease up some with the Hitler reference, but it only makes Maxine nervous. Wild talents like Uberschnaz here, she learned long ago at the campus of Fraud University, can often be nutcases also." I don't know if so the pinch on wiki makes the joke that it could be NYCFU. That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense because campus would have to be in like the name of the university to work for that joke, but I think it's funnier to believe conceptually that there is a fraud university in New York that you can go to like learn fraud examiner.
Yeah.
Like I think that conceptually is much better than that joke. Um, so that is when they have a brief conversation about the fact. Oh no, I'm sorry, jumped ahead. And then yeah, he he goes off to the bathroom, which and it's a punk bar, so Pinchon had to put something in here. Comes back to the bathroom, and does someone want to read what he says that smells like?
At which point Conklin comes back and the sacrometer readings drop to a less alarming level. Fascinating toilet. Not quite the complexity of a Welcome to the Johnsons, say, but plenty of stories, old and new. Which I didn't know what Welcome to the Johnsons was, but when I went to the pitch on Wiki, holy shit, is that a punk rock club bathroom?
Oh yeah, yep. It's not quite CBGB's. I don't think there'll ever be a bathroom quite like CBGB's, but it's close.
It's it's a real piece of work.
The sacrometer readings dropping to a less alarming level is referring to the conversation between Heidi and Maxine when Conkling went to the toilet, where Heidi makes it pretty clear that that she's going to try and steal Conkling from her because she's saying stuff like, "Oh, are you guys like an item? Are you together?" And Maxine doesn't quite say that they are and tries to prevent this from happening by saying, "Well, what about you and Carmine, who she's supposed to be deeply in love with?" Um, and you know, she says, "Carmen and I are deliriously happy." "No, I'm only thinking of you, Maxine, my best friend. Don't want to get into your way." Which, as we know from like chapter 3, is not the truth.
Yeah.
She regularly does get in Maxine's way. So then we leave that scene and enter into the last one of the chapter. Maxine gets a call from Axel down at the tax office and explains that the people involved in this Vip Epperdu case have suddenly disappeared. This is another person on Maxine's suspect list that has died or mysteriously vanished, crossing them off one after another. Then she spends some time with Uncle Dizzy's receipts. Conkling turns up to be in her waiting room at her office, looking through issues of Fraud magazine. I feel like the world Pynchon creates in these books is it's just a bit more fun.
Yeah.
You have things like Fraud magazine or the New York Fraud University.
I would love to thumb through a copy of Fraud magazine just to see what is going on in there.
What are the periodicals in Fraud magazine like?
Is there like a recurring article that somebody's been working on for the last year?
Is there
detailing...
is there like that 60 question interview that is in Playboy that people like to use as a cover for why they read Playboy?
Yeah.
But in Fraud magazine?
Or is it more like what was it? Highlights. Where it's like it's like spot the difference, but like with fraudsters. Like, how is this document different from this document? Goofus and Gallant, fraud detectives.
Yeah. It's a bunch of stuff like that, and then like Thrasher magazine, where most of it is ads.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus
for
Christ.
different fraud investigators and stuff like that. It turns out that Conkling is here to basically break up with Maxine by saying that he's going to be going out with Heidi now, and Maxine doesn't take this well. She's clearly upset by it, but is trying to sort of be the bigger person in the conversation. But Conkling can kind of see that that this is something that she's not taking well, even we're really only together the one time, and didn't even like kiss or like sleep together or anything. But there is a real like sad note in this interaction between the two. It could be a mixture of the foreshadowing of the earliest chapters of the book when we learn that this is something that Heidi has sort of done habitually, and also the kind of previous conversation in the bar. But you can tell that another facet of Maxine's character, for all of her sort of self-possession and like intelligence and her ability to kind of like do her job to such a high degree, does come at the cost of the fact that like she is still sort of a single mother. Horst does show up every once in a while, but he doesn't seem to be particularly invested in raising the kids at all from anything textually. He's more kind of a layabout guy who shows up every once in a while and occasionally takes them. And she still struggles with the fact that she isn't married to him, like still clearly has feelings about him, and has regularly enough been on dates with other people that clearly she would like kind of this cycle to stop happening, and that she'd like to be happy and probably married to somebody who's not abusive. Yeah, it's not sadly not going to work out. This comes after something that is a bit more important, however, where Conkling shows up and said that he had just consulted one associate, and it says she can foresmell things. Sometimes a scent can act as a trigger. In this case, more like a detonator. She took one pass at the air sample I showed her and went nitrous. For weeks already, she'd been going around in a state of panic, short of breath, waking up for no reason, probed gently but insistently by a reverse sillage, awake from the future. She says, no one alive has smelled it before. Toxic accord she's been picking up. Bitter, indolic, caustic, like breathing in needles, is how she puts it. Proprietary molecules, synthetics, alloy, all subjected to catastrophic oxidization. Which means like what, a fire? So somebody is smelling the future in Conkling's orbit, and is particularly smelling a mixture of proprietary molecules, synthetics, alloys. This thing that she's smelling would appear to be the coming 9/11 attack. This quote, specifically with what it brings out, mentions several things that were present in the construction of the World Trade Center. A lot of proprietary technology went into that structure. A lot of experimental sort of fire suppression protocols and sort of safety stuff was built into it to make it, again, like we talked about in an early episode, sort of this impenetrable building. That it was supposed to be indestructible, so even more is taken out. Not only that, but the fire that lasted, or that went on for days after the towers fell, did damage a lot of people's lungs. There was a pretty famous court case that Jon Stewart, of all people, was involved in getting restitution for first responders that were affected by the toxic air in the 9/11 site. There was a lot of people who lived close to the 9/11 site who aren't first responders who suffered, later symptoms of asthma or lung damage as a result of it. So what she's experiencing from a standpoint of this like foresight, but with her nose, is very true to people who are close to the blast. Not only that, but she's been telling a lot of people to leave town, and is saying like, just get out of New York. This is a real thing that apparently happened. If you look at a lot of oral histories of 9/11, a lot of people will mention that it seemed like there was almost like a mass exodus from the city the weekend before 9/11 happened, that a lot of people were going on vacation, a lot of people were finding reasons to leave town. It was just kind of this weird, like, I don't know, something's in the air. And if you do look at like world news the week before 9/11, there was a lot of unrest like globally. There's an interesting article from The Atlantic that talks about the week before 9/11 in pictures, where they showcase like all of these different world events that were captured photographically, and a lot of them are sort of not good news, like violent confrontations or unrest in other nations. A lot of this can also be captured if you read a book called The Only Plane in the Sky, An Oral History of 9/11, written by somebody named Garrett Graff. He basically just interviewed a bunch of people on the ground a bunch of citizens of New York and civilian people that were around when it was happening to kind of build a narrative around the day from the individual eyewitness accounts. But yeah, it was just sort of one of those weird things. It just something in the air didn't feel right, and a lot of people left. Pynchon seems to be accounting for this, at least in part, with a psychic smeller going around people to get out of the city, whatever she's smelling happen. So chapter 21 closes out with this brief interaction at the end, which I also really like. Of does someone want to read starting with wistfully, though rehearsed, to the end of the chapter?
Wistfully, though rehearsed, I think you and I took it about as far as it was going. Yes, we could have been an item, Maxine pretends to reflect. With Heidi, you don't think it's just the Nazer, do you? You want to be appreciated for yourself. Bring out the Nazer once, people jump to conclusions. Some women can't resist a military connection, however remote. I was never a field type. In my heart, I'm always behind some desk, not like what? Never mind. It is insanely unlikely he was about to mention Windust. Insane, right? But who else, then?
Yeah, I just really like that conversation, not only with the way that begins, kind of drawing their kind of a partnership to a close, which Maxine obviously hoping there's going to be more there for. Conkling disagrees, but it seems like it's probably just a rationalization. But then moving into that idea, she doesn't just like me because I have a gun, which is really, again, an outgrowth of Heidi's love of men in uniform. That whole idea of when you try a cop, you can't stop. And then turning it back on Maxine, having sort of the same affliction. The only person that she can think of when brought up is Windust, who will come back in the book. I promise those who have not read this. There is a reason why he is still on her mind for a lot of these middle chapters before he shows back up. But is another good point in that whether it's Windust, whether it's Brock, whether it's any of these people, in a lot of cases, what they're attracted to is not the person, but what the person represents. For Conkling, that is the Nazer, for whatever godforsaken reason someone would be attracted to that. But for men like Windust or the cop Nizzoli, it's the gun, or it's the status, or it's the power. It's not anything but the man. It's something else entirely. So Maxine reflects on that as we close out chapter 21. Any funny parts we did not bring up over the course of reading these chapters, covering these chapters?
There are a few. The main one I wanted to bring up was just Eric asking Maxine, "Was that okay for you too?"
Oh yeah.
Which is just a weird response to somebody, giving you a foot job. Was that okay for you too? There's a lot of funny parts in these chapters, but that's probably the one that stands out the most.
Yeah, he's being a little vulnerable about his fetish.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. I didn't have any funny parts other than what we are. So that brings us to quotes. Who would like to go first?
Mine's on page 232 when they go into Vodka Script, which great name for a bar, which I would imagine they have Zima at, but
I'm sure they have to.
It's not explicitly stated, so we don't know. At Vodka Script, they find a room full of Trustafarians, cybergoths, out-of-work code folk, uptowners ever in search of a life less vapid, all jammed into a tiny ex-neighborhood bar with no AC and too many amplifiers, listening to Pringle Chip Equation. The band are all wearing nerd eyeglass frames, like everybody else in the room, sweating. The lead guitarist plays an Epiphone Les Paul custom, and the keyboardist a Korg DW8000. And there's also a reed person with assorted horns and percussionist with a wide range of tropical instruments. In a special guest appearance tonight, Driscoll Paget is heard on an occasional vocal. Maxine never imagined that Driscoll's universe of three-letter acronyms might include LBD, but now look at this latest edition. Hair pinned up, revealing to Maxine's surprise one of those sweetly hexagonal junior model faces. Eyes and lips underdone, the chin resolute as if she were getting serious about life. A face Maxine can't help thinking come into its own. Just a great description of that venue, which I totally meant to bring up, and it didn't even occur to me until just now. Will mentioned when we made our attempt at this episode last week, that this is a very Twin Peaks scene. This is like the Roadhouse.
Very true.
which, yeah, I don't know how I didn't clock that when I was reading it for this, but that's absolutely the case. Like, I could imagine this being, like Julie Cruz going up and doing her songs, or any of the other guests that came through on the return. But yeah, just a really nice lead up into what we already talked about is one of the better songs that Pinchon has included in his works.
Yeah, definitely. If we have any fans out there who wanna record that song,
Oh, that'd be cool. Yeah.
that'd be very cool. I'm sure we'd happily play it on this podcast.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. My quote comes from the strip club on page 220. It says, "Now Maxine hasn't been a size 2 since back when a 2 was really a 2, instead of the current definition, which for purposes of commerce can run up to what used to be known as a 16 and beyond. To her credit, she does not blurt thanks for the pleasantry, but shrugging begins to look through the contents of a beat-up armoire against the wall, full of somebody's notion of glamorous lingerie, outfits of subcultural interest, nun, schoolgirl, warrior, princess, and spike heels, each pair more, you would have to say, alluring than the last. Not designer footwear exactly, the sort of shoes that get podiatrists to daydreaming of Ferraris and personal golf lessons from Tiger Woods." I like that quote for a number of reasons. One, again, Pinchon being very realistic in his presentation of a woman's struggles. It's very true. Nothing is the same size from brand to brand. It all changed, and it's a nightmare. I don't know why I have to cry while shopping for pants, but it's very real. That's lived experience for sure. But then just the way that the whole rest of it is described from a standpoint of Maxine going through this trunk of like dirty lingerie in a gross environment, but referring to it as subcultural interests. And then the last joke about shoes that are so uncomfortable that a podiatrist would start daydreaming about golf lessons with Tiger Woods. It's so perfect. It's such a good description of the environment Maxine is in, but seen through the lens of somebody who's a bit more highfalutin, maybe a bit more upper class than the average person in the establishment. It's just really great writing.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So my quote comes from page 218. It's the last paragraph of chapter 19. But Verva is far away now, the summer street outside, the cumulus piling up over Jersey, the rush hour bearing down. It's all country miles from wherever she is, rambling some deep archer of the unshared interior, her click history vanishing behind her, like footprints in the air, like free advice unheard. So Maxine supposes it'll have to keep whatever it is, whatever's finally on the term sheet. I just found that passage really beautiful.
It is really
That
beautiful.
is, yeah.
And I'm glad I deliberately did not read it because I figured that it might be someone's quote at the end of this episode. But I also really love what she says to Virva before that quote, where it says, "Except that in my business, Maxine gently see as a lot of innocent people making these deals with the satanic forces for money way out of scale to anything they're used to, and there's a point where it all rolls in on them and they go under, and sometimes they don't come back up." And then that's when it goes into your quote, Luke, about her noticing that Virva's already left. It's such a great moment, not just for the amazing writing that you pointed out in that quote, but also just like what that symbolizes, the fact that Maxine was not able to save Lester and is now giving Virva a warning too late. So it's already this cycle that's repeating itself. Lester made a deal with the devil, and Virva at least supports her husband and his partner making a deal with the satanic forces as well. So it really does get to that idea of just, this is a process that repeats, and in the same way that whoever is going to buy the Deep Archer source code is going to cause the original intent to vanish, so too are her footsteps vanishing off into the sort of sunset, so to speak. It's a great way to end the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
That brings us to most pinch-on part of the chapter. I think just the character of Eric Outfield would be my choice for most pinch-on part of the chapter.
Yeah.
Just, it seems like a distinctly Pinchonian character, and just the level of detail that goes into this guy who shows up for like a chapter but has been talked about for a long time is particularly Pinchonian.
Definitely. I would say either the humor that is scattered throughout these chapters, or I really think the juxtaposition of using of Conkling being able to foretell the horrible event that is about to happen through using his nose is a really kind of very Pinchonian thing to do. That highbrow, lowbrow kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true.
So I think that would probably be my most Pinchon part of these chapters.
Mine is probably the description of the Joie de Vivre sign,
That's a
which
good one, yeah.
reads, yeah, it's neon sign depicting a lewdly humanized beaver wearing a beret and winking its eyes alternately at a wiggling stripper. It does remind me of the Cucumber Lounge in Vineland.
Yep.
That sign,
Mhm.
um, is just pretty funny to visualize.
Very true. The man loves a entertaining neon sign.
Who among us doesn't?
Great, exactly. Exactly. Listener comments?
Yeah, so Nick Dreesen is commented on our Mason and Dixon chapters 6 through 10 episode, saying, "Keep it up. I'm reading through Pinchon in chronological order of when the books take place. So this is the first. Loving seeing these videos. That's something we even talked about during Mason and Dixon. I think was the
We
idea
did.
of reading them in chronological order as of the time in which they took place, which would be a really interesting thing. And kudos to you for undertaking that that challenge, Nick. And I would love to know. Although, if that's what you're doing, this is the last.
This is the last
it's
one.
dawning
I
on me that this
have
is
the same thought, Cody.
Hey, let us know how it was when
Yeah.
we're done with the show. I guess I don't know how quickly you're getting through these, but no, we'll have time. We got a couple of big ones ahead of us.
Yeah.
so,
Yep.
But yeah, Nick, whenever you get to this one, hit us up and let us know how it was. I genuinely, I know we're joking about it, but I really would like to know, like, how does that change the reading experience?
Yeah.
Are you catching, connections that maybe you didn't before, or anyone else who's done that? I'm genuinely curious about that. I think that maybe the next time I go through all the books, not for the show, I might try that myself. But I'm really interested to hear about that kind of experience.
I'm gonna be doing a portion of that with a friend of mine, actually.
Ooh,
Um,
okay.
She was just interested in like the podcast that I do because I was uh like hanging out with her while I was sort of writing notes for this chapter, and so we got to talking about like Pinchon in general because she had never heard of him. So we talked about him for like a good hour, and then by the time that conversation had ended, I had like described all of the books as far as the time period they take place in, and kind of the idea that they form that sort of alternate history of America. And she was
Mhm.
like, the three that sound the most interesting to me are like V, Crying of Lot 49, and Inherent Vice. And I was like, that would actually make probably a very interesting, just like trilogy of his books to read.
Yeah.
From a standpoint of like that midsection of the history that he's covering. And so we're gonna do it. We're gonna read V and then Crying of Lot 49, and then
Interesting. That's
yeah.
a
As an additional announcement, Brett Beeble's amazing companion, not campaign, a Mason and Dixon companion was finally published. The pre-orders finished up and it came out. Congratulations, Brett. I can't wait to
Mhm.
read it. I'm sure it's going to be really great. Thank you for continuing to listen to the show and supporting us.
Yeah.
Your contributions to Mason and Dixon were indelibly important. So hopefully maybe you'll do more companions. I know you said you wouldn't, but like maybe there's another one in the pipelines.
maybe if you all ask real nice,
Yeah.
I'll do another one.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so go check out Brett's book if you haven't through pre-order.
We'll put a link in the
It's-
show notes for where to order it.
It's University of Georgia Press that he's
Yes,
through,
University
right?
of
Yeah.
Georgia Press. Yeah.
Yeah. As always, thank you for listening to the show. You can contact us on various social media platforms. We have an email at mappingthezonepod@gmail.com. We are on Twitter at twitter.com/pinchonpod. Refuse to call it X. And then we are also on Instagram at mappingthezonepodcast. Lastly but not leastly, If you think this episode of the show is worth $1, I'd love to have it. Mapping the Zone now has a Ko-Fi account. We are at ko-fi.com/mappingzone. That's basically just there as a donation link. If you're interested in supporting the show in any way, this is no pressure for any of our listeners. This is just merely if you like the work that we do and you want to support us with like a dollar, whatever. We would love to use that money to upgrade our equipment or to pay hosting fees, things like that. Absolutely no pressure. This is not going to be a change to any of the release schedule or how our content runs. It is just there if you want to support the show in any way, and we'll happily use the money to make the show better rather than using it for anything else.
Indeed. And there's also in the show notes, there will be a link to a Google form that we've created that is essentially just a survey. We just kind of want to get some feedback from listeners about, what it is you like about the show, where you think we can improve on the show, just, general feedback that would help us to kind of, look at where to go and what to do as we go forward. When we finish Bleeding Edge, we pretty much are halfway through the books. So, we I think have learned a lot as we've done this over the last year and change, and we want to continue to make the show as good as possible and to, really get to the full potential that I think we have. So any feedback that you would like to leave, we would be happy to take it. And we'll try to make the show the best that we can going forward.
And we'll have that Google form available for the rest of Bleeding Edge, and then to the next book, right? And then that's when we'll close it up. So you have some time as well to fill it out. You have to.
Yeah, it's not going to be a short
right
run
away.
And I'll put the link up on the Twitter page, and we'll make sure it's out there. So, and if you don't want to use the Google form, anytime, if you have any ideas or suggestions or feedback or anything, please, feel free to email us and let us know. And we're happy to take all that in.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening once again. We will be back next week with chapters 20, 23, 20. What? Yeah, we're going to read chapter 20. Then we're going to read chapter 23 and 24. No, we'll be back with chapters 22, 24 next week of Bleeding Edge. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.
Oh, I was going to ask you about your Gatsby reading. Is it? I imagine
My
you've read
Gatsby
it before.
reading.
Is this?
I have.
Is this just like a reread for the sake of it, or like a specific thing with somebody else?
My best friend, the bassist in my band, dead. The 2-year anniversary of his passing was May 12th, and that was his favorite book. So
okay.
I thought to myself, I have not read that in a really why don't I get a copy? And boy, are there a lot of different that was a whole nightmare and a half trying to figure out if there was any substantial difference between what was to as the authorized version and the other ones. There is not. The authorized version, the original publisher of The Great Gatsby is trying to say on new editions of it in order to keep people from buying the ones put out by other publishers because they have the right to do it now that it's public domain.
Okay.
So it's just a tactic to try and keep their profits book high, which is dumb.
How sneaky of them.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I picked up on a lot more as an adult than I did as a teenager, that's for sure. And
yeah, I was going to say, I haven't read it in a while. I think the last time I read it was probably college.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a good high school to college book to have students read because of how obvious the symbolism of the major stuff in it is. I understand why it's curriculum everywhere. But I was surprised to see that there was still a great bit more to it that you just don't discuss in those early literature classes because everyone's talking about the green light as literary imagery for desire or longing or envy or anything like that. But Nick is actually quite a more interesting protagonist than like a cursory reading of it is because he's actually an unreliable narrator, which I did not pick up on when I read the book as a teenage girl. He
Hmm.
contradicts himself. He claims to be someone who doesn't judge other people, but he's giving judgments of people the entire book. He claims in one place that like his relationship with Jordan is one thing, but then another place says it's something else. In another chunk of the book, he talks about like his marriage as not being a thing at all, but then in another book he talks about how important it is that he makes sure he separates. He at one time says that Gatsby is like wretched and awful, but then reports that he's telling him to his face that he's better than all the rest of them. Yeah, he's not a reliable. So
I need to
that
go back
adds.
and reread it.
Yeah, it's worth it. I read it in like 3 days. It's not long.
Yeah, it's a short book. I remember that.
And
I
it's written very modernly as well. It does
Yeah.
not suffer from being old at all.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I just remembered it because I guess I was telling you the other day, like that podcast I've been listening to did a show within the show book club episode on it, which was actually ended up being a really interesting dissection of the book itself while staying true to the format of the show and the just general goofiness that exists within it. So it was a
Yeah.
really kind of a fun listen. And yeah, I was like, I need to go back and reread that book.
Yeah.
So
What it really made me want to do is read F. Scott Fitzgerald's other books. So after
I
I
remember
finished it,
reading, was it Tender as the Night?
that's one of them. Yeah,
I read
that's his
that one,
first
but
one.
that was a long time ago too. I don't know that I read any of his other stuff.
Yeah, I went out to the bookstore immediately after finishing Gatsby, and I was like, I'm gonna go get The Last Tycoon, which is the posthumous one that he never finished
Mm-hmm.
because he drank too much. And I've always just been intrigued. I'm always intrigued by posthumous novels, especially
Yeah.
when they're published but they're not finished. Like that in particular always intrigues me because it would stand to reason that since it wasn't finished, there was something about it that still made it seem pushable or worthwhile. And a lot of people I have read think that The Last Tycoon would have been his best book if he had actually finished it. Like as far as the quality of it was going to be was sort of pointing towards. So I got that, and then I got The Beautiful and the Damned. Sounded the most interesting, and I know some of like the real life controversy behind it, in that it's kind of about him and Zelda, in the same way that sort of Gatsby and Daisy are about him and Zelda,
Mm-hmm.
but that it parts of the book may or may not have been stolen from stuff that Zelda had like written, because there's a period where she thought that she was going to be a writer as well, and actually had some pretty like well done short stories and everything that were actually published under Scott Fitzgerald's name. So I picked up that one too. So we'll see if those are any good. But yeah, I was impressed. There's a lot more to mine for depth out of that book than my high school aged self.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember for a while. I know I read it in high school and then I read it again in college. And for a while, it was like, a book that I considered to be one of my favorites. And I don't know why I never reread it again after that last one. It's been probably close to 15 years.
Yeah,
Maybe more than that.
I'd say you're due for a reread on
Yeah.
Gatsby.
Yeah.
I did start calling a couple of my employees Old Sport as I was reading it, which they did not care for, other than one of
That's on
them who
them.
found it somewhat amusing.
That's funny.
Yeah, it's, sometimes the old slang terms are the ones that really need to be brought back in a
Yeah.
major way.
Yeah.
Yeah, just makes sense.
I'm doing, I'm rereading the Chronicles of Prydain series with my son for his show.
No idea what that is.
So it's a fantasy series that came out in 1961, I think.
Okay.
It's interesting because that was like the fantasy series I read as a kid that got me into fantasy, like before I ever read like Lord of the Rings or that stuff. And I read it to him when he was, I think like 8 or 9. Picked it back up and I read it to him. We would read a few chapters every night. And so he brought up that he wanted to do that on his show. So we're rereading through it now, and it holds up surprisingly well. Like it's very much like what would today I guess be like classified as young adult, but it doesn't fall into the young adult tropes now of like talking down to the reader and having just like really shitty characters.
Sure. That's
it
cool.
has actually very well done characters, and especially for a fantasy series, it has a very well done female protagonist who
Shocking.
yeah.
Is it written by a woman?
No, it is written by a man.
Shocking again.
Yeah, and he handles that character very well. She never feels like she's there to serve whatever the boys want to do. She has a lot of her own. There's a whole book that pretty much revolves around her, and her part of her journey, and she is integral to the story. And yeah, it holds up very well. I've read it. This is probably the 10th time I've read it since I was a kid, because I was a series that I just kept on my bookshelf as a kid and would read over and over. So that has been one of my kind of rereads that I've been doing. I've also been on a big Clive Barker kick, so I've been reading a bunch of his stuff.
What are you reading? Like a short
interesting.
story collection, or what are you reading?
I did get Books of Blood, but I picked up when I was at the library pretty recently. They had The Great and Secret Show, which I hadn't heard of, and I was looking at the back of it and reading the description. Somebody, I think it was the New York Times, described it as a combination of Lord of the Rings and Gravity's Rainbow, which I was like, okay, that's a really bold claim to make.
Yeah,
and a weird thing to put together. And so I read it, and it's very good. It's absolutely like neither of those books. So I don't know where that's coming from. It felt more like the stronger parts of Stephen King's writing and Neil Gaiman's writing.
Huh. Okay.
It was really good. It was very enjoyable. It's part of a duology, I guess. I need to find the second book.
Mm-hmm.
And then I read The Hellbound Heart, which was the novella that became Hellraiser. Yeah, which I ended up rewatching Hellraiser just to see how close they adapted that, and it's pretty spot on. Hellraiser doesn't hold up particularly well. I think it falls into a lot of those 80s horror tropes that just suck.
Yep.
Which sucks because there's a lot of potential in there.
Yeah, there is a potential that I would say is capitalized on by the Hulu movie from 2022.
I need to watch that. I saw that they redid it, and so I'm gonna go and check it out. So
I was very surprised at how good that was.
That's good to know.
I was really anticipating that movie to kind of be garbage, but it's probably the best Hellraiser movie maybe ever that
Really?
they've made. Yeah,
I've only seen the first 2. I don't think I watched any beyond that.
You don't need to.
I don't think I need. That's probably why I didn't, because they all looked like ass.
It turned into one of those direct to Blockbuster DVD shit shows.
I figured that was the case. It went down the Freddy and Jason path of just like, let's keep churning these out. Oh, that's
like I would say, the quality of the average
low bar to clear too.
The quality of the average Freddy and Jason late stage film is better than everything from Hellraiser 3 onward. Like I'd say, like Hellraiser 3 is really where the gears start to slip, and it just gets worse and worse as it goes on. Where really the only reason anyone watches these because of the lore.
Yeah,
like I don't think anybody, including my friend Zach, who's really watches them because they're good. It's just because they have a lot of lore in. Like that was what they did to kind of like sustain the audience of like, look at us developing this world.
Yeah.
Or like Pinhead in particular, rather than it being like, look at how good this movie is.
Which is interesting because I know he wrote another book that takes place in that universe. I don't know how
3.
specifically. Did he write 3? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was just one more.
Yeah,
okay.
No, there's 3 of them.
Interesting.
And I think actually he co-wrote one of them.
Pulling it up right now. Yeah, you're right. It is. There's Hellraiser: The Toll was the second one with Mark Allen Miller.
Yeah.
and then Scarlet Gospels. Scarlet Gospels is the one I was thought that was. So that's interesting.
So there's definitely more there. I think that he excels at short stories.
Yeah, I need to read Books of Blood. That's on my shelf right now. I'm doing a reread of. I've read a lot of new stuff this year, and I want to go back to something familiar. So I'm doing another Lord of the Rings reread.
I
So
can't with those books, man.
a lot of people can't. That's fine. It's a comfort thing for me, and I've grown up with those books, so I always have a place in my heart for them.
I love The Hobbit. I think The Hobbit's great.
Hobbit is great, and I'm going to read. My daughter wants to read that, so
But like, just it's so
it's not for
obvious.
everybody. It's really not.
It's so obvious that what he wanted to do was just write encyclopedias.
Well, that was the Silmarillion,
And
100%.
That's basically also the Lord of the Rings, except he had some restraint. The Silmarillion was an unrestrained J.R.R. Tolkien. But like, yeah, when you have even the dedicated fan base of something, yeah, you can skip considering hobbits, and you can also skip anything where Tom Bombadil shows up.
That's the chapter I ended on when I was reading today. I like Tom Bombadil, but that's me. I know I'm in the minority
only one on that one.
There's dozens of us.
Dozens of Tom Bombadil stands.
Right.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So yeah, I'm doing that, and then my son wants to do. He is desperate to read more quote unquote adult stuff. He's 12, so he wants to. He wants to
Forum. What do you
right?
mean? Adult stuff.
He wants to do. He wants to do the Dark Tower. So that's going to be our journey into the Stephen King universe for his show.
A universe where all of the flashbacks are infinitely more interesting, going on in real time.
I like that series. It has its weak points for sure. I particularly thought that most of those books got better as they went on, like within the series.
I have the exact opposite opinion.
Really?
I love the first one, really like the first two, or like the second, third, and fourth, and then I didn't even finish the last one.
Oh man,
I read the Wikipedia page.
I think that the first book is like potentially the best thing J.R.R. Tolkien, the best thing Stephen King has ever written. Because he was restrained. He had to write it in a serial magazine form.
Yeah,
so he couldn't be Stephen King. And it was incredibly fascinating. I think book 2 is a waste of everyone's time. I think the first half of book 3 is a waste of everyone's time. And then as soon as they meet the suicidal train, it gets really interesting until the end. And then I love the entirety of book 4 fucking rips. I love that.
Wizards and Glass is awesome.
It's so good, and I didn't read anything beyond that. I was like, I am on a road of diminishing returns here, I think. Because like the biggest thing to me is I think the reason I loved number 4 so much is the world that he created for the gunslingers and all of that is so much more interesting than the post-apocalyptic version of that world. Like, I just wanted more of the world that he had actually created rather than
I can see
the story of Roland and his 2 companions.
I could see that. It took me a while to get from Wizard and Glass to the book 5, Wolves of Calla. And it gets really meta through the 5, 6, and 7. But in a weird way that it really worked for me, at least. And then the ending was pretty much exactly what I wanted it to be, even though I didn't know it would be what it was. When it happened, I was like, okay, that's pretty good. That's perfect.
Yeah, the whole Stephen King insert I felt was really cringe, honestly. I felt like there's a lot of lead up to it. It was really anticlimactic, I guess is the best way I can put it, is where like there's all this lead up to it and you're like, oh, this is gonna be so cool. And then he's not a very interesting character.
I think, I see where you're coming from. I think it it worked in the sense that I think it helped him as a writer to get out a lot of his insecurities, personal, especially after the car accident that he went through. So I think that was kind of his outlet for doing that. I don't think it worked 100% as well as he wanted it to, but I didn't really have any particular issues with it. And I think it's one, as far as the series itself, if there's anything, as much as I love Stephen King, and because I've been a big fan of his for a long time, like his endings tend to suck terribly. I thought Dark Tower was good. I thought it ended well. I was just talking about this yesterday. We went to a baseball game here with an author friend of ours, and we were talking about his endings and how when they work, they really work well. But
This is
9
true.
times out of 10, they are absolute garbage. And it felt like he had a really cool idea, and he wanted to write, about these characters of this world or whatever the case may be, and had no clue how to end it and just tacked an ending on. And Under the Dome is the primary example of that. I loved that book until the last 100 pages, and then I wanted to set it on fire.
Yeah,
The
that's
Stand is my go-to for the worst ending.
Ooh, that's not a
Interesting.
popular choice for that one.
I hated the ending. I thought it was complete Deus Ex Machina that made no sense. Or like there was no lead up to it. There's no foreshadowing.
I mean, that's
If I
definitely in
remember
line with what he
correctly.
does a lot of times.
He
I
li-
don't.
he-
I didn't get that feeling with that book, though.
What Stephen King does is he paints himself into a corner, and then because
Uh-huh.
for some dumb reason he feels the need that he needs to write every single day, he can't just take a breather and think about it. So when he runs out of ideas after painting himself into a corner, everything explodes.
Yep.
Which is what happens at the end of The Stand.
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
felt it was a little more earned in that one, but it definitely, that is what exact he does. And again, Under the Dome is the primary example of that bullshit.
Yeah.
That pissed me off so much.